The woman with green skin had been watching Yannick Bradford work his fields for 3 months, and every morning she told herself it would be the last time she came to his well. But her body had other needs now, needs that made her hands shake and her vision blur if she waited too long between meals or water. She crouched behind the stone rim in the pre-dawn darkness, cupping the cold water to her lips with trembling fingers, trying to be gone before he woke. But this morning, her body betrayed her with a wave of nausea so sudden and violent that she had to press both palms against the swell of her belly and close her eyes against the spinning world. She did not hear his door open or his boots on the dirt path, so when his voice cut through the morning quiet, asking if she was unwell, her heart seized with such force she thought it might stop entirely. Kara straightened too quickly, swaying on her feet as she turned to face the human man whose land she had been trespassing on for months. He stood 20 paces away, wearing nothing but loose trousers and an undershirt despite the autumn chill, his dark hair wild from sleep, and his brown eyes fixed on the place where her hand still rested protectively over her stomach. She watched understanding dawn across his features, watched his gaze drop from her face to her belly to her hands and back up again, and in that moment she knew her secret was shattered beyond repair. How far along? His voice was quieter than she expected, without the anger or disgust she had been preparing herself to face. Kara took a step backward, her boot heel scraping against stone. "I should go. You have been coming here for water since the first frost." Yannick did not move closer, but he did not retreat either. "I noticed after the first week, you are always careful to come before dawn and leave before I start my work." Her tusks pressed against her lower lip as she clenched her jaw, a habit she had developed to keep herself from speaking when silence was safer. The sun was beginning to lighten the eastern sky, turning the clouds pink and gold, and in that growing light she knew he could see every detail of her condition. The slight rounding of her belly beneath her patched leather tunic, the way her breasts had grown fuller and more tender, the exhaustion that had taken up permanent residence in her bones. 3 months, she said finally, because there seemed little point in lying now. Maybe closer to 4. Yannick rubbed a hand across his jaw, still watching her with those steady brown eyes that had no right to be so kind. He was younger than she had first assumed, perhaps 25 or 26, with the broad shoulders and calloused hands of a man who worked his land himself rather than hiring it done. His farm was small but well kept, the kind of place that spoke of careful attention and long hours of labor. "You look half-starved," he said. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" The question was so unexpected that Kara actually laughed, though the sound came out harsh and broken. "Why would you care?" "Because you are standing in my yard looking like you might fall over, and I am not the kind of man who watches someone collapse from hunger." He gestured toward his small stone cottage. "I have bread and eggs, cheese, some dried apples from last year's harvest. I am an orc." She said it like a challenge, straightening her spine and lifting her chin so he could see her tusks clearly in the strengthening light. "You know what that means. It means you are a person who needs help." Yannick took a single step forward, moving slowly as though approaching a skittish animal. "It means you have been desperate enough to risk coming onto human land every morning for 3 months, which tells me you have nowhere else to go." Kara's throat tightened with something that might have been tears if she still had any left to shed. She had been alone since her clan cast her out, alone and pregnant with a child conceived in violence by an orc warrior who had decided her refusal was merely a challenge to overcome. When she had gone to the clan mothers for justice, they had looked at her belly and told her she should be grateful any male had wanted her at all, that her resistance had clearly been weak if he had succeeded in planting his seed. that she would bear the child and raise it as a reminder of her place. She had left that night with nothing but the clothes on her back and a knife at her belt, and she had been running ever since. "If someone sees me here, they will burn your farm," she said, forcing the words past the tightness in her chest. "They will call you an orc lover and drive you out of the valley. Then we had better make sure no one sees you." Yannick smiled, and it transformed his whole face, softening the hard lines of his jaw and bringing warmth to his eyes. "Come inside, eat something. We can figure out the rest after." Every instinct Kara possessed screamed at her to run, to disappear into the forest, and never return to this place where someone had finally looked at her with something other than contempt or fear. But her legs were shaking, and her stomach was a knot of desperate hunger, and the child growing inside her needed food more than she needed pride. She followed him into the cottage. The interior was simple but clean. A single large room with a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain, a stone fireplace with a cooking pot suspended over banked coals, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and shelves lined with preserved foods and cooking supplies. Yannick gestured for her to sit while he built up the fire and began pulling out ingredients, moving around the small space with the ease of someone long accustomed to caring for himself. Kara lowered herself into one of the chairs and tried not to let her hands shake as she rested them on the table. The cottage was warm and dry and smelled of wood smoke and herbs, and it was so far removed from the cold forest floor where she had been sleeping that she felt lightheaded from the contrast. "I inherited this place from my father 2 years ago," Yannick said as he cracked eggs into a pan, keeping up a steady stream of quiet conversation that demanded no response. He was a veteran of the border wars. Lost his leg in a skirmish near the Greentooth Mountains, and took a land grant from the Crown as compensation. He spent 20 years turning this rocky soil into something that would actually grow crops. He glanced over his shoulder at her. "He also taught me that the world is more complicated than most people want to admit, and that an enemy on the battlefield does not mean every member of that race is your enemy forever. Your father sounds like an unusual man." Kara watched him work, noting the competent way he handled the cooking, the care he took with even this simple meal. Yannick slid eggs onto 2 wooden plates, added thick slices of bread and cheese, and brought both to the table. "He died last winter. Fever took him quick. I am sorry." The words felt inadequate, but she meant them. They ate in silence for several minutes, and Kara had to force herself to go slowly even though her body wanted to stuff food into her mouth as fast as she could swallow. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the bread was fresh, and the cheese had a sharp tang that made her eyes water with how good it tasted after weeks of sparse meals foraged from the forest. When her plate was empty, Yannick refilled it without asking, and she ate the second, helping only slightly slower than the first. "Thank you," she said when she finally pushed the plate away, feeling more human than she had in months despite the irony of that comparison. "I have no way to repay you. I am not asking for repayment." Yannick leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression she could not quite read. "But I am asking what you plan to do when winter comes in earnest. You cannot keep sleeping in the forest, not in your condition." Kara looked down at her hands, at the dirt under her nails and the calluses on her palms. "I will figure something out. You could stay here." Her head snapped up so fast she felt something crack in her neck. "What?" "There is an old root cellar built into the hillside behind the cottage." Yannick spoke carefully, as though he had been thinking about this for some time. "My father used it for storage, but it is large enough to serve as living quarters. Stone walls, good drainage, a door that locks from inside." No one would know you were there unless they came up the hill, and no one has reason to do that except me." "Why would you do this?" Kara heard the suspicion in her own voice and hated it, but she could not help the question. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing." "Because I have been watching you come to my well for 3 months." Yannick met her eyes steadily. "Because I see how carefully you move, how you check every direction before you approach, how you drink and leave before anyone could possibly know you were here. Because you are alone and pregnant and trying so hard to survive, and I have the means to help. And what would you want in return?" She made herself ask it, made herself prepare for whatever answer he might give. She had learned long ago that kindness always came with a price, especially for someone like her. Help with the harvest. His answer was so immediate and practical that she almost laughed. "I can manage the farm on my own, but it would go faster with 2 pairs of hands. And in winter there is always work to be done, repairs and preservation and 100 other tasks. If you are living here, you might as well be useful." It was such a pragmatic proposition, so free of any hint of the darker motives she had been bracing herself to refuse, that Kara found herself nodding before she had fully thought through the implications. "I can work," she said. "I am strong, even now, and I know farming. My clan raised crops before they raised warriors." "Good." Yannick stood and began clearing the plates. "I will show you the cellar after breakfast. We can clean it out today and get you properly settled before nightfall." Kara followed him outside after the dishes were washed, still half convinced this was some elaborate trap that would snap shut around her any moment. But Yannick simply led her around the back of the cottage to where a hillside rose behind the property. And there, built into the slope with a door of thick oak planks, was the root cellar he had described. The interior was larger than she expected, perhaps 10 feet wide and 15 feet deep, with stone walls that rose to a curved ceiling reinforced with timber. It smelled of earth and old vegetables, but it was dry and cool and infinitely better than sleeping exposed to the elements. There were shelves along one wall still holding jars of preserved foods, and hooks in the ceiling where herbs and onions had once hung to dry. "We will need to bring down a cot and some blankets," Yannick said, looking around with a critical eye. "And I have an old brazier that will provide heat without too much smoke. The chimney flue still works, I think, but we should test it before you try keeping a fire overnight." They spent the rest of the day cleaning out the cellar and making it habitable. Yannick brought down a serviceable cot with a straw mattress, blankets that smelled of cedar from long storage, a small table and chair, the promised brazier, and an oil lamp for light. Kara scrubbed the floors and walls while he worked on clearing the chimney flue, and by the time the sun began to set, the space had been transformed into something that actually resembled living quarters. "It is not much," Yannick said as they stood in the doorway, surveying their work. "But it should keep you warm and dry through the winter. It is more than I have had in months." Kara looked at him, at this human man who had shown her more kindness in a single day than her own people had offered in a lifetime. "Why are you really doing this?" Yannick was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "My father used to tell me a story about the border wars," he said finally. "About a time when his unit was ambushed in the mountains and he was separated from the others, injured and lost. An orc woman found him bleeding in a ravine. She could have killed him or left him to die, but instead she bandaged his wounds and brought him food and water for 3 days, until he was strong enough to find his way back to his lines." He looked at Kara with those steady brown eyes. "He said she never told him her name, never asked for anything in return. She just helped him because he needed help, and then she disappeared back into the mountains." "And you think I am like her?" Kara asked quietly. I think the world would be better if more of us acted like her, Yannick said. Human or orc? That night, Kara lay on the cot in her new shelter and tried to remember the last time she had felt safe. The blankets were warm, the mattress was softer than the ground, and for the first time in months she did not have to sleep with one eye open and her knife in her hand. She placed both palms over her belly, feeling the slight swell where her child was growing, and allowed herself to consider the possibility that she might actually survive to see this pregnancy through. The next morning, she woke to find a basket waiting outside her door containing fresh bread, cheese, apples, and a clay jug of milk. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, and then went to find Yannick already at work in the fields. He looked up as she approached, shading his eyes against the sun. "You did not have to come out so early. You should rest. I told you I could work." Kara picked up a spare harvesting blade from the tool rack near the field's edge. "Where do you want me to start?" They fell into a rhythm over the following weeks, working side by side to bring in the last of the harvest before the first hard frost. Kara had not been lying about her strength or her knowledge of farming. Despite her pregnancy, she could work for hours without tiring, and her experience with crops was evident in the efficient way she moved through the rows of vegetables and grain. Yannick proved to be a patient teacher when she encountered tools or techniques unfamiliar to her clan's methods, and a steady presence that made the work feel less like labor and more like partnership. They spoke little while they worked, but the silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward, filled with the sounds of their tools and the wind through the grain. In the evenings, Kara would retreat to her cellar while Yannick returned to his cottage, maintaining the careful separation that kept their arrangement from becoming complicated. But sometimes he would call her up for dinner, insisting she needed more than cold rations, and they would eat together at his table while he told her stories about his father or asked careful questions about her life. She found herself answering more honestly than she intended, telling him about her clan and the way they treated their women, about the warrior who had forced himself on her and the mothers who had blamed her for his crime, about the long weeks of wandering before she had stumbled onto his farm and seen the well. Yannick listened without judgment, his expression growing darker as she described the violence and injustice, but he never once suggested she had been at fault or deserved what had happened. That simple acceptance meant more to Kara than all the shelter and food combined. "Your clan is wrong," he said one evening after she had finished describing the mother's decree. "What he did to you was not your fault, and you had every right to refuse him. Try telling that to an orc clan elder." Kara traced a finger through a puddle of spilled water on the table. "Among my people, strength is everything. If you cannot defend yourself, you are weak. If you are weak, you have no rights. That is a brutal way to live. It is the only way I have ever known." She looked up at him. "Your people are not so different, though. Humans see orcs as monsters. They would kill me on sight if they knew I was here." "Some would," Yannick admitted, "but not all. There are others like my father, people who understand that wars are fought by leaders and soldiers, not by every person who happens to share their blood. Those people are rare." Kara stood to clear the dishes, a task she had taken on as her contribution to these evening meals. And they do not usually risk their lives and livelihoods to prove it. Maybe they should. The first snow came in early November, dusting the fields with white and turning the morning air sharp enough to sting. Kara woke to find her breath misting in the cellar despite the brazier, and when she climbed out to fetch water from the well, she found Yannick already awake and splitting firewood. "Winter is here," he said, gesturing to the snow. "From now until spring thaw, you should avoid going out during daylight as much as possible. The snow will hold tracks, and I cannot explain orc footprints leading to and from my property." Kara nodded, understanding the wisdom even as she felt the walls of her world contracting. "I will be more careful. I will bring your meals down to the cellar," Yannick continued, "and we can work on indoor tasks together. I have repairs that need doing, equipment that needs maintenance, wool that needs spinning, plenty to keep both of us occupied." True to his word, Yannick adapted their routine to the demands of winter secrecy. He brought her breakfast each morning and dinner each evening, and during the day they worked together in his cottage on the endless tasks of farm maintenance. Kara learned to spin wool and mend tools, to tan leather and preserve meat, to do all the small necessary jobs that kept a homestead running through the cold months. Working inside the cottage meant more time in close quarters, more conversations, more moments of accidental contact when they both reached for the same tool or passed too close in the small space. Kara found herself noticing things about Yannick she had been too cautious to observe before. The way he hummed tunelessly while he worked, the small scar above his left eyebrow that he claimed came from a childhood accident involving a goat and a fence post, the careful gentleness of his hands when he showed her a new technique. She also noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, his expression soft and wondering, as though he could not quite believe she was real. It terrified her. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire spinning wool into thread, Yannick suddenly asked, "Have you thought about names?" Kara's hand stilled on the spindle. "Names for the baby." He kept his eyes on his own work, giving her space to avoid the question if she wanted. "You must have thought about it." She had, though she had tried not to let herself dwell on it too much. Thinking about names meant thinking about a future where the child was born healthy, where she survived the birth, where they both lived long enough for a name to matter. Those thoughts felt dangerously close to hope, and hope was a luxury she had learned to live without. "If it is a girl," she said slowly, "I thought perhaps Rena. It was my mother's name before the fever took her. Rena is a good name." Yannick glanced at her, his expression gentle. "And if it is a boy, I do not know." Kara resumed spinning, letting the familiar motion calm her. "I do not want to give him an orc warrior name. Those names are all about strength and conquest and violence. But I do not know human names well enough to choose one that would not sound strange." "What about something simple?" Yannick suggested. "Thomas or William or James. Names that mean something ordinary that do not carry the weight of expectations." "James," Kara repeated, testing the sound. "I like that. It sounds strong without being aggressive." "James it is, then." "If you have a son." Yannick smiled at her, and something warm unfurled in Kara's chest at the sight, "though I have a feeling it will be a daughter." "Why do you say that? Just a sense?" He shrugged. "My father always claimed he could predict the sex of calves and foals with unusual accuracy. Maybe I inherited some of that gift." They continued working in comfortable silence, but Kara's mind would not let go of the conversation. Yannick had asked about names as though he would be there to meet the child, as though her future and his were somehow intertwined. It was a presumption that should have annoyed her, but instead it filled her with a strange mixture of fear and longing. She had been alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care about her future. December brought deeper snow and colder nights, and Kara's belly grew round enough that she could no longer hide her condition beneath loose clothing. Her body ached in new ways as the child shifted and grew, pressing against her ribs and bladder, making sleep difficult and movement awkward. Yannick noticed her discomfort and began bringing extra pillows to the cellar, showing her how to arrange them to support her back and belly. "My mother was pregnant with my sister the year before she died," he explained when Kara asked how he knew so much about pregnancy. I was 10, old enough to help. She taught me how to help her get comfortable, which positions eased her back pain, what foods helped with nausea. What happened to your sister? Kara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. She was stillborn. Yannick's voice was flat, emotionless in the way of old grief. My mother never recovered. She died of infection 3 days later. I am sorry. Kara reached out without thinking and placed her hand over his where it rested on the table. That must have been terrible. Yannick looked down at their joined hands, then turned his palm up to clasp hers properly. It was a long time ago, he said quietly, but it taught me that childbirth is dangerous, especially without proper help. When your time comes, I will ride to the next valley and fetch the midwife. I do not care what she thinks about your race. She will help you or answer to me. The fierce protectiveness in his voice made Kara's throat tight. You cannot do that. If people find out you are harboring an orc, they will. I do not care what they will do. Yannick squeezed her hand. You are not going through this alone, Kara. I will not let you. She wanted to argue, to point out all the ways his plan could go wrong, but the words died in her throat when she saw the determination in his eyes. He meant every word, she realized. He would risk everything to keep her safe, this human man who had known her for barely 2 months. Why? She whispered. Why do you care so much? Yannick was silent for a long moment, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a stranger who needed help, he said finally, and started seeing you as someone I could not imagine living without. The confession hung between them like a held breath, enormous and terrifying and impossible to take back. Kara stared at him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs, and tried to find words for the tangle of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. I am pregnant with another male's child, she said, forcing the words out past the tightness in her throat. A child conceived in violence. I am an orc and you are human, and even if we could somehow make this work, the world would never let us. I know. Yannick lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her eyes burn. But I also know that I wake up every morning grateful you are here, that I have never felt more at peace than I do when we are working side by side, that when I think about the future, you and your child are in it. He lowered their joined hands but did not release her. I am not asking you to feel the same way, I just needed you to know. Kara pulled her hand free and stood abruptly, needing space to breathe, to think, to process what he had just offered her. I should go, she said, heading for the door. It is late. Yannick did not try to stop her, but his voice followed her into the cold night. Kara, whatever you are feeling, whatever you decide, I am not going anywhere. This is still your home for as long as you want it. She fled to the cellar and closed the door behind her, sliding down to sit with her back against the wood and her head in her hands. The child moved inside her, a rolling flutter that reminded her of all the complications she carried with her. She was damaged goods by any measure, an exile from her own people with nothing to offer but sharp edges and bitter experience. And yet, Yannick looked at her as though she was something precious. She pressed her palms against her belly and tried to imagine a future where this could work, where she and Yannick could build something real together. The images that came to her were impossibly sweet, the two of them working the farm with a child playing nearby. Yannick teaching her daughter to plant seeds or her son to mend a fence. A life of simple domesticity, the kind she had never dared to want because wanting led to disappointment and disappointment led to pain. But what if this time was different? What if Yannick meant everything he said? The next morning, she climbed out of the cellar to find him already at work in the barn, mucking out stalls with single-minded focus. He looked up when she entered but said nothing, giving her the space to speak first or not at all. "I have been thinking about what you said," Kara began, her voice rough from a night of little sleep. "About seeing a future with me and the child." Yannick straightened, leaning on his pitchfork. And I think I have been seeing the same thing, even though I was afraid to admit it." She took a step closer, her hands twisted together in front of her. "I do not know how to do this, Yannick. I do not know how to let someone care about me without waiting for them to hurt me. I do not know how to trust that this is real and not just some temporary kindness that will evaporate when things get difficult." Then we learned together. He crossed the space between them and took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "I am not asking for perfection, Kara. I am just asking for a chance. What if I cannot give you what you deserve?" The question came out small and broken. "What if I am too damaged, too angry, You are none of those things." Yannick cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheeks. "You are strong and resourceful and kind in ways you do not even seem to realize. You are a survivor, and that is exactly what this life requires." Kara closed her eyes, letting herself lean into his touch, letting herself believe for just a moment that this could be real. "I am afraid," she whispered. "So am I." His breath was warm against her forehead. "But I would rather be afraid with you than safe and alone." She opened her eyes and found him watching her with such open honesty that it made her chest ache. Before she could talk herself out of it, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. A brief, clumsy kiss that tasted of hope and uncertainty, and the beginning of something fragile. Yannick made a soft sound of surprise but responded immediately, his arms coming around her to pull her close, careful of her belly. The kiss deepened, turning from tentative to sure, and when they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I do not know if I can love you the way you deserve," Kara said, resting her forehead against his chest, "but I would like to try. That is all I am asking." Yannick pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "We will figure out the rest as we go." Winter deepened around them, but inside the cottage and the cellar, something warm and new was growing. Kara and Yannick fell into a new rhythm, one that included stolen kisses while they worked, and evenings spent sitting close by the fire, his arm around her shoulders and her head resting against his chest. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts and dreams for their future, building the foundation of something that felt increasingly like love. Yannick proved himself patient and careful with her, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, always checking that she was comfortable and content. When her back ached from the weight of the child, he would massage her shoulders and lower spine until the pain eased. When she woke from nightmares about her clan or the warrior who had hurt her, he would hold her and talk softly until she calmed. "You are safe here," he would murmur into her hair. "I will not let anyone hurt you again." And slowly, carefully, she began to believe him. The winter solstice came and went, marked by a simple celebration of mulled cider and honey cakes that Yannick baked himself. They sat together in the cottage as the year's longest night stretched around them, and Kara felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of the world. For so long, she had believed that happiness was something other people experienced, that someone like her was meant to scrape by on survival and nothing more. But here in this small cottage with this patient, kind man, she was learning that happiness was not a prize to be won or a gift to be granted. It was something you built day by day, choice by choice, moment by moment. And she was building it now, one shared meal and gentle touch at a time. In January, her belly grew large enough that moving became difficult, and simple tasks like drawing water or splitting wood were beyond her capabilities. Yannick took over all the heavy work without complaint, insisting she focus on staying healthy and resting as much as possible. He also began preparing for the birth in earnest, gathering supplies and consulting the medical texts his father had kept from his time in the army. "I am going to ride to Millbrook Vale tomorrow," he announced one evening over dinner. "The midwife there is supposed to be the best in the region. I will tell her I need her services for late February, and I will pay whatever she asks." Kara set down her spoon, her appetite suddenly gone. "What will you tell her about me?" "As little as possible." Yannick reached across the table to take her hand. "But Kara, I need you to understand something. If the birth goes badly, if there are complications, I will tell her whatever I have to tell her to get her to help. Your life matters more to me than any secret. If she sees what I am, she will tell everyone." Kara pulled her hand back, fear rising like bile in her throat. "They will come for me. They will take the baby. They will have to go through me first." Yannick's voice was hard, his expression set in lines of absolute determination. "And I promise you, Kara, I will not make that easy." She wanted to argue, to point out that he was just one man against an entire valley of people who would see her as a monster. But the fierce protectiveness in his eyes silenced her objections. He truly would fight the world for her, she realized. He would burn down his own life to keep her safe. The knowledge was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. "All right," she said quietly. "Go to Millbrook Vale. Speak to the midwife. We will deal with whatever comes after." Yannick left before dawn the next morning, bundled against the cold and riding his sturdy plow horse. Kara watched from the cellar entrance as he disappeared down the snow-covered road, and then retreated inside to wait. The day stretched endlessly without him, every creak and whistle of wind making her jump, every shadow seeming to hide some threat. By the time she heard hoofbeats in the early evening, she had worked herself into such a state of anxiety that she met him at the door with her knife drawn. "It is just me," Yannick said quickly, raising his hands. "Everything is fine." Kara lowered the knife, embarrassed by her overreaction. "What did the midwife say?" "She agreed to come when I send word." Yannick dismounted and began leading his horse to the barn. "She charges 5 silver marks, which is steep but not unreasonable for a winter birth. I did not tell her anything about you except that the mother is young and healthy, and this is a first child." And she asked no other questions. Kara followed him into the barn, watching as he unsaddled the horse and began rubbing it down. She asked if I was the father. Yannick glanced at her with a wry smile. "I told her the situation was complicated but that I was committed to supporting both mother and child. She seemed satisfied with that answer. You lied for me." I bent the truth a little. He finished with the horse and turned to face her fully. "But the important part was honest. I am committed to supporting you and the baby, Kara. That is not a lie." She crossed the space between them and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He smelled of cold air and horse and the mint soap he favored, familiar and comforting. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Yannick held her close, one hand stroking her hair. "You do not have to thank me for caring about you. Yes, I do." She pulled back enough to look up at him, "because no one else ever has." February arrived with a late-season blizzard that buried the farm under 3 feet of snow and kept both of them trapped inside for days. Kara moved into the cottage during the worst of the storm, too pregnant now to safely navigate the path between cellar and house in the deep drifts. They made up a bed for her near the fire, and Yannick slept in his usual spot behind the curtain, maintaining propriety even as the walls between them grew thinner. On the 4th night of the blizzard, Kara woke to a strange pulling sensation low in her belly, different from the practice contractions she had been experiencing for weeks. She lay still for several minutes, timing the sensations, and when they came again at regular intervals, she knew with sudden certainty that her time had come. "Yannick," she called softly, "I think the baby is coming." He was at her side in seconds, pulling on his boots even as he assessed her condition. "How far apart are the pains?" "Maybe 10 minutes." She gripped his hand as another contraction rolled through her. "But they are getting stronger. All right." Yannick's voice was steady despite the fear she could see in his eyes. "I need to get to the midwife, but the snow is too deep for the horse. It will take me hours to walk there and back." "Then you have to go now." Kara forced the words out past clenched teeth, "before the labor progresses too far." Yannick looked torn, clearly reluctant to leave her alone but knowing they had no choice. "I will move as fast as I can," he promised, bundling into his heaviest coat and wrapping his face against the cold. "There is water boiling on the fire and clean linens in the chest. If the baby comes before I get back, I know what to do." Kara managed a weak smile. "I have been preparing for months. Just go." He kissed her forehead and then he was gone, disappearing into the storm. Kara listened to his footsteps crunching through the snow until the sound faded, and then she was alone with the pain, and the fire and the slow, inexorable process of bringing a new life into the world. The contractions intensified over the next hour, coming closer together and lasting longer each time. Kara breathed through them the way Yannick's medical texts had described, focusing on relaxation rather than tension. But it was hard to stay calm when every contraction felt like her body was trying to tear itself apart. She shifted positions restlessly, trying to find some arrangement that eased the pressure, and finally settled into a squat beside the fire, gripping the edge of the table for support. Time lost meaning in the haze of pain and effort. She did not know if hours or minutes had passed when she heard the door burst open and looked up to see Yannick stumbling inside, covered in snow and breathing hard. "The midwife is coming," he gasped, stripping off his wet coat. "But the snow is deep. It might take her another hour or more." "The baby will not wait that long." Kara panted through another contraction, feeling the overwhelming urge to push. "Yannick, I can feel the head. It is coming now." To his credit, Yannick did not panic. He moved to wash his hands in the hot water, then knelt beside her with clean linen spread beneath them. "All right," he said, his voice remarkably steady. "I have you. When the next contraction comes, push as hard as you can." The next hour was a blur of pain and effort, and Yannick's calm voice guiding her through each push. She bore down with all her strength, feeling her body stretch and tear, feeling the impossible pressure of the child moving through her. At some point she started screaming, unable to contain the sounds any longer, and Yannick just held her hand and told her she was doing perfectly, that she was so strong, that it was almost over. And then, with a final wrenching push that left her gasping and shaking, the baby slid free into Yannick's waiting hands. For one terrible moment, there was only silence. Kara's heart seized with fear as she watched Yannick clear the infant's mouth and nose, watched him rub the tiny chest with the linen. Then the baby drew breath and let out a furious wail, and Kara started crying with relief so profound, it felt like her whole body might dissolve. "It is a girl," Yannick said, his own voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the baby and carefully placed her on Kara's chest. "You have a daughter." Kara looked down at the tiny creature in her arms, at the perfect miniature features and the wisps of dark hair. The baby's skin was a softer green than Kara's own, and her ears were only slightly pointed, but there was no mistaking the orc heritage. Small tusks would grow in later, Kara knew, and the child would face all the challenges that came with being half human and half orc. But for now she was just a baby, perfect and beautiful and completely hers. "Hello, Rena," Kara whispered, touching one finger to her daughter's tiny fist. The baby gripped it immediately, her hold surprisingly strong. "I am your mother." "And this?" She looked up at Yannick, who was watching them both with wonder written across his face. "This is the man who saved both our lives." The door opened again, admitting a blast of cold air and a stout middle-aged woman carrying a medical bag. The midwife took in the scene with one sweeping glance and immediately began issuing orders, shooing Yannick aside so she could examine Kara and the baby properly. "Well, you have already done the hard part," the midwife said as she worked. "Let us make sure everything else is in order." Kara tensed, waiting for the moment when the midwife would notice her green skin or her tusks, but the woman seemed completely focused on her professional duties. She delivered the afterbirth, checked that Kara was not bleeding excessively, examined the baby's breathing and reflexes, and wrapped them both warmly before stepping back with a satisfied nod. "Mother and child are both healthy," she announced. "The baby is small but strong. She should thrive with proper care and feeding." The midwife finally looked directly at Kara, and her expression was carefully neutral. "I assume there are complications around this birth that I do not need to know about." Kara glanced at Yannick, who had moved to stand beside her chair. He met her eyes and gave a tiny nod, telling her the choice was hers to make. "Yes," Kara said quietly, "there are complications. Then my professional advice is to keep this child warm, well-fed, and as hidden as possible until you can relocate somewhere more accepting." The midwife packed her supplies with brisk efficiency. "I have delivered many babies in my time, and I have learned that a child's life matters more than politics or prejudice. I will not be the one to endanger this little one." "Thank you," Kara whispered, overwhelmed by this unexpected grace. "Truly." The midwife accepted her payment from Yannick and then paused at the door. "For what it is worth, young man, you did well. Not many could have delivered a baby under these conditions and kept both mother and child alive." She looked between them, her expression softening slightly. "Whatever arrangement you two have made here, it seems to be working. I hope you have the courage to keep it that way." And then she was gone, disappearing back into the storm. Yannick sank into the chair beside Kara's, all the tension draining out of him at once. "I think my hands are still shaking," he said, holding them up to demonstrate. Kara shifted the baby so she could reach out and lace her fingers through his. "You were amazing," she said. "I could not have done this without you." "You could have," Yannick corrected gently. "But I am glad you did not have to." He looked down at Rena, his expression soft. "She is beautiful, Kara." "She is ours," Kara said, the words escaping before she fully realized what she was saying. But once they were spoken, she knew they were true. Rena might have been conceived in violence by another male, but she had been born into safety and love, and Yannick had been there for every moment that mattered. He had earned his place in their small family. "Ours," Yannick repeated, testing the word. Then he smiled, that transforming smile that made him look years younger. I like the sound of that. The weeks following Rena's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding, learning to care for an infant while recovering from childbirth. Yannick proved himself an attentive and helpful partner, taking over all the household tasks so Kara could focus on the baby. He learned to change cloths and soothe crying and rock Rena to sleep, and he did it all with a patience and gentleness that made Kara fall a little more in love with him every day. Because that was what this feeling was, she finally admitted to herself. Love. Not the violent possessive claiming her clan called by that name, but something quieter and stronger. A partnership built on respect and kindness, and the daily choice to care for each other's well-being. One evening in early March, as they sat together by the fire with Rena sleeping peacefully in a cradle Yannick had built, Kara finally spoke the words she had been carrying for weeks. "I love you," she said quietly. "I do not know when it happened exactly, but somewhere between the well and the harvest and the snow and the birth, I fell completely in love with you." Yannick set down the harness he had been mending and turned to her with such open joy that it made her breath catch. "I've been waiting to hear you say that," he said. "I love you too, Kara, you and Rena both. You are my family now, even though I am an orc." She had to hear his answer one more time, "especially because you are an orc." Yannick reached out to cup her face in his hand. "You are the bravest, strongest, most remarkable person I have ever known. Your race does not define you. Your choices do, and you have chosen courage and survival and love at every turn." Kara leaned into his touch, feeling the last of her walls crumbling. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We cannot hide here forever. Eventually someone will discover us. Then we leave." Yannick said it so simply, as though uprooting his entire life was a minor inconvenience. "The spring thaw will come in a few weeks. We can sell the farm and use the money to travel north, to the territories where humans and orcs are learning to coexist. I have heard there are settlements there, mixed communities where people are judged by their actions rather than their blood. You would give up your father's land." Kara could not quite believe he was serious. "Everything you have built here, this land is just dirt and stone," Yannick said firmly. "You and Rena are my home now. Wherever you are is where I want to be. What if the Northern Territories are just a dream?" She had to voice her fears, had to make sure he understood what he was offering. "What if we travel all that way and find nothing but more prejudice? Then we keep looking until we find a place that will accept us." He took both her hands in his. "Or we make our own place, somewhere so remote that no one can tell us how to live. I do not care, Kara, as long as we are together." She looked at him for a long moment, this human man who had given her everything and made her decision. "All right," she said. "We will go north. We will find a place where Rena can grow up safe, where she does not have to hide what she is." "Where we can all be safe," Yannick corrected. He stood and pulled her to her feet, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Marry me," he said suddenly. "I know it will not be legal in most places, and it will not protect us from prejudice, but I want to make that commitment to you anyway. I want to stand before whatever gods or witnesses we can find and promise to love you for the rest of my life." Kara felt tears prickling behind her eyes, but for once they were tears of joy rather than pain. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you, Yannick Bradford." They married themselves that night, speaking vows they wrote together in the quiet privacy of the cottage while Rena slept in her cradle. There were no witnesses except the fire and the sleeping baby, no ceremony except the joining of their hands and the promises they made to each other. "I vow to stand by you in times of plenty and times of want," Yannick said, his voice solemn. "To protect you and Rena with everything I have. To build a life with you wherever that life may lead. To love you without reservation or regret for all my days. I vow to trust you even when trust is hard," Kara responded, her own voice steady despite her emotion. "To share my strength and my fears with you equally. To raise our daughter to be brave and kind and free. To love you with all that I am, for as long as I draw breath." They sealed the vows with a kiss, and though no priest blessed their union and no community celebrated their joining, the commitment felt more real and binding than any official ceremony could have made it. The spring thaw came in late March, turning the snow to mud and opening the roads for travel. Yannick sold the farm to a young couple from the next valley, telling them only that he had decided to try his fortune in the Northern Territories. He negotiated a good price for the land and equipment, enough to fund their journey and give them a cushion to start over wherever they settled. They left on a gray morning in early April, before the sun rose and while the valley was still sleeping. Yannick drove a wagon loaded with their possessions, while Kara sat beside him with Rena bundled against her chest. The baby was 2 months old now, alert and curious, tracking the movement of the trees and clouds with wide, dark eyes. Kara looked back only once as they left the farm behind, taking a last look at the cellar where she had found shelter and the well where Yannick had first discovered her secret. So much had changed in the 6 months since that morning. She had arrived alone and desperate, and she was leaving as part of a family. "No regrets?" Yannick asked, following her gaze. "None," Kara said honestly. "That place saved my life, but it was never truly home. Home is wherever we are together." They traveled north for 3 weeks, following rumors and traders' tales about the mixed settlements in the frontier territories. The journey was not easy, with a young infant and the lingering prejudice they encountered in the towns where they stopped for supplies. But they kept moving, kept searching, until they finally crested a ridge and saw a valley spread below them where humans and orcs worked side by side in the fields. The settlement was called New Haven, and it had been founded 5 years earlier by veterans of both sides who had grown tired of fighting. The town council interviewed them carefully before granting permission to settle, asking hard questions about their commitment to the community and their willingness to abide by the laws that governed human and orc relations equally. "We do not tolerate violence or prejudice from either side," the council leader explained, a grizzled orc woman with scars across her face and arms. "You work, you contribute, you treat your neighbors with respect, and you will be welcome here. You make trouble and you leave. It is that simple." "We just want a place to raise our daughter in peace," Yannick said, his arm around Kara's shoulders. "A place where she can be herself without fear." The council leader looked at Rena, who was peeking out from Kara's shawl with bright, curious eyes, and her stern expression softened slightly. "Then you have found it," she said. "Welcome to New Haven." They were granted a plot of land on the western edge of the settlement, good farming soil with a stream running through it and a stand of timber for building. Yannick immediately set to work constructing a cabin, aided by neighbors both human and orc who showed up to help raise the walls and build the roof. Within a month, they had a snug one-room house with a stone fireplace, a solid door, and windows that let in the light. Kara planted a garden while Yannick cleared fields for crops, and in the evenings they would sit together on the porch they had built, watching Rena learn to roll over and grasp at toys. The settlement welcomed them without judgment, treating their mixed family as just another household among many. Children of all races played together in the common areas, and no one looked twice at a human man and an orc woman walking hand in hand down the main street. It was everything they had dreamed of and more. One evening in midsummer, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples over the valley, Yannick turned to Kara with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about going back?" he asked. "To find your clan and show them what you have built?" Kara considered the question, watching Rena gum on a wooden toy in her lap. "No," she said finally. "They made their choice when they cast me out, and I made mine when I chose to survive without them. They do not deserve to know about this, about the life we have created. Fair enough." Yannick took Rena from her arms and held the baby up, making silly faces that had her gurgling with laughter. "What do you say, little one? Are you happy being ours and no one else's?" Rena grabbed his nose with a tiny fist, tugging hard enough to make him wince, and both Kara and Yannick laughed at her determination. "I think that is a yes," Kara said, leaning against Yannick's shoulder. "She knows who her family is." As the stars came out overhead and the sounds of the settlement quieted for the night, Kara thought back to that morning by the well, when Yannick had seen her holding her belly, and her secret had become impossible to hide. She had been so afraid in that moment, certain that discovery would mean her death. Instead, it had meant her salvation. The man who had seen her that day had not just offered her shelter. He had offered her partnership, respect, love, and a future she had never dared to imagine. He had helped her birth her daughter and vowed to raise her as his own. He had walked away from his entire life to find a place where they could all be safe. And in return, she had learned to trust again, to hope again, to open her heart to the possibility that she was worthy of love despite everything her clan had told her. The months that followed their arrival in New Haven settled into a comfortable rhythm of work and family life. Their farm prospered under their joint efforts, producing enough crops to feed themselves and sell surplus at the settlement market. Rena grew from an infant into a toddler, learning to walk and talk with the determined energy of a child who had never known fear or rejection. She spoke a mixture of human common tongue and Orcish, picking up words and phrases from both her parents and their neighbors, and her laughter became the soundtrack of their household. Kara found unexpected friendship among the other Orc women in the settlement, particularly a younger female named Tala, who had also fled a violent clan situation. They would meet in the afternoons while their children played, sharing stories and advice, and Kara slowly began to heal from the wounds her own people had left. She learned that not all Orcs embraced the brutal philosophy of strength above all, that some yearned for gentler ways of living just as she had. Yannick, meanwhile, became known throughout New Haven for his fairness and hard work. He was elected to the settlement council in their second year, representing the human farmers, and he used his position to advocate for policies that strengthened cooperation between the races. He was patient with those who still harbored old prejudices, but firm in his insistence that the future belonged to those who could build bridges rather than walls. On Rena's second birthday, they threw a party that brought together friends from across the settlement. Human and Orc children ran wild in the yard, playing games that required no distinction between races. Adults shared food and stories, laughing together in the golden summer light. Watching it all, Kara felt a peace so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you thinking?" Yannick asked, slipping an arm around her waist. "I am thinking that I never knew life could be this good," Kara said honestly. "That morning when you found me by the well, I was so close to giving up entirely. I thought I would die alone in the forest and the baby with me." "But you did not give up." Yannick kissed her temple. "You kept fighting, kept surviving. I just gave you a reason to keep going. You gave me everything." She turned in his arms to face him fully. "A home, a family, a future. I do not have words for what that means." "Then do not try to find them." He smiled down at her, that warm, open smile she had learned to treasure. "Just be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you." They were interrupted by Rena barreling into them at full speed, her small arms wrapping around both their legs as she announced she wanted more cake. Yannick scooped her up with an exaggerated groan about how big she was getting and carried her back to the party while she giggled and grabbed at his hair. Kara followed more slowly, taking a moment to appreciate the scene before her. This was her life now, not just survival, but genuine happiness. Not just shelter, but true belonging. She had a husband who loved her without reservation, a daughter who would grow up knowing she was wanted, and a community that accepted them all exactly as they were. The Orc had kept her secret for 3 months, hidden by the well in the early mornings, desperately hoping to go unnoticed long enough to figure out what to do. But the man had seen her holding her belly in a moment of vulnerability, and instead of turning away, he had stepped forward. That single act of kindness had changed everything. As the party continued around her, and the sun began to set over their thriving farm, Kara made a silent promise to herself and to the universe that had somehow granted her this second chance. She would never take this life for granted. She would honor Yannick's trust every day. She would raise Rena to be strong and kind in equal measure. She would be the partner and mother and community member that this new life required. And she would remember, always, that even in the darkest moments, hope could find a way through. That sometimes salvation came in the form of a man by a well who chose compassion over fear, who offered shelter to a stranger, who looked past the surface to see the person underneath. They had built something beautiful together, and it was only just beginning. Years later, when Rena was old enough to ask about her origins, Kara and Yannick told her the truth. They explained how her mother had fled a cruel clan, how she had been discovered by a kind human man, how they had fallen in love despite everything working against them. They told her about the cellar where Kara had sheltered through that first winter, about the night she was born during a blizzard, about the journey north to find a place where they could all be free. Rena listened with wide eyes, taking it all in, and when the story was finished, she looked between her parents with a very serious expression. "So you saved each other," she said, as though it was the most obvious conclusion in the world. Kara and Yannick exchanged a look, and then both of them smiled. "Yes," Kara said, pulling her daughter close. "I suppose we did." And that, in the end, was the truest version of their story. Not a tale of rescue or salvation flowing in just one direction, but a mutual saving, a partnership built on the understanding that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept help, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is offer it. The settlement of New Haven continued to grow and prosper, becoming a beacon for others seeking refuge from the prejudices of the outside world. Kara and Yannick's farm became one of the most productive in the valley, and their household was known for its warmth and hospitality. They had 2 more children in the years that followed, a son they named James, as Kara had once suggested, and another daughter they called Lissa, after Yannick's mother. Rena grew into a confident young woman who moved between human and orc communities with ease, becoming a bridge builder like her father and an advocate for justice like her mother. She inherited Kara's strength and Yannick's patience, and she used both to make the world around her a little bit better. On their 10th anniversary, Yannick took Kara back to the well where he had first discovered her secret. They had traveled south for a trading expedition, and he had insisted on making the detour to the old farm. The current owners had maintained the property well, and the well itself still stood where it always had, a simple stone circle that held a decade's worth of memories. "This is where everything changed," Yannick said, standing at the rim and looking down into the dark water. "This is where I found you and where our life together truly began." Kara took his hand, lacing their fingers together in the way that had become as natural as breathing. "I was so afraid that morning," she admitted. "When you saw me holding my belly when I knew you understood, I thought my life was over. And instead it was just beginning." Yannick pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. "I knew the moment I saw you that you were important. I did not know yet that you would become everything, but I knew I could not just let you disappear. I am glad you are a stubborn man." Kara leaned back against his chest, feeling safe and loved and impossibly grateful. "I am glad you insisted on helping even when I tried to refuse. I am glad you saw past what I was to who I could be." "I saw who you already were," Yannick corrected gently. "Strong and brave and determined to protect your child no matter the cost. That person deserved help, deserved kindness, deserved love. I just had the good fortune to be in the right place at the right time to offer it." They stood there for a long time, holding each other beside the well, remembering the desperate woman and the kind man who had found each other in the early morning light. So much had changed since that day. So much had been built from those frightening, uncertain beginnings. But the core of it remained the same. Two people choosing each other again and again, through every challenge and every joy. Two people building a life together one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. The orc had kept her secret for 3 months, but when the man saw her holding her belly by the well, he had not turned away in fear or disgust. He had stepped forward with an offer of help, and that offer had blossomed into something neither of them could have predicted: a partnership, a family, a love that transcended the boundaries of race and prejudice, and everything the world said should keep them apart. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Not where they had come from, but where they had chosen to go together. Not what the world expected of them, but what they had decided to build despite those expectations. They had saved each other, Rena had said, and she was right. But more than that, they had chosen each other every single day in ways large and small. That choice, repeated and reaffirmed through a decade of shared life, had created something unshakable. As they walked away from the well hand in hand, heading back toward their wagon and their children and the life waiting for them in New Haven, Kara knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again. Every hardship, every fear, every moment of uncertainty had been worth it to arrive at this place of peace and belonging. The journey that had begun with a desperate woman stealing water before dawn had led to a future brighter than she had ever dared to imagine. And it had all started because one man had seen her secret and chosen kindness over fear, compassion over prejudice, love over hate. That choice had made all the difference. And it would continue to make a difference, rippling outward from their family to their community to the world beyond, proving that even in dark times, even when everything seemed impossible, hope and love could find a way through. The orc and the man returned to New Haven as the sun set, their children running to greet them with shouts of joy and stories of everything that had happened while they were gone. Yannick swept James into his arms while Kara caught Lissa, and Rena stood to the side grinning at her parents' return. Their house glowed with lamplight in the gathering dusk, a beacon of warmth and safety and home. Inside, there would be dinner and laughter and the comfortable chaos of family life. There would be challenges ahead, certainly, because life always brought challenges. But they would face those challenges together as they had faced everything else, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Kara looked at Yannick across the heads of their playing children, and he met her gaze with that same warm smile that had first made her believe she might deserve happiness. 10 years of marriage, 3 children, countless obstacles overcome, and that smile still made her heart skip a beat. "I love you," she mouthed silently. "I love you too," he mouthed back. And with those simple words, spoken and unspoken, reaffirmed and renewed, they walked together into their home, into their life, into the future they had built one choice at a time. The secret by the well had become a love story for the ages. The desperate beginning had transformed into a triumphant middle, and was heading toward a future limited only by their imagination and commitment. The orc woman who had once thought she would die alone had found not just survival but joy, not just shelter but belonging, not just acceptance but passionate, enduring love. And the man who had chosen to offer help to a stranger had gained far more than he had given, finding in that frightened orc woman a partner who matched him in every way that mattered, a companion who would stand beside him through whatever came, a love that deepened with every passing year. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and lasting and true. A family that defied convention. A love that transcended prejudice. A life that proved again and again that choosing kindness over fear could change everything. The well stood empty now, a silent witness to the transformation it had sparked. But the love born beside that well continued to grow and flourish, spreading roots deep into the soil of New Haven, branching out to touch countless other lives, bearing fruit that would nourish generations to come. And it had all begun with a single moment of courage. The courage to ask for help, the courage to offer it, the courage to see past the surface to the person underneath, the courage to choose love even when the world said it was impossible. That courage had changed 2 lives completely, and through those 2 lives, it had begun to change the world. The orc had kept her secret for 3 months, but when the man saw her holding her belly by the well, everything changed. And thank the gods for that change, because it had led to this perfect, improbable, hard-won happiness, this life where an orc and a human could love each other freely, where their children could grow up whole and unashamed, where the future stretched ahead full of possibility rather than limited by fear. This beautiful, complicated, thoroughly worthwhile life that neither of them would trade for anything in the world. And as the stars came out over New Haven, and the sounds of the settlement quieted for the night, Kara and Yannick sat together on their porch one more time, hands intertwined, hearts at peace, and knew that they were exactly where they were meant to be, together. Always together. Building their life one moment at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And that was the best ending anyone could possibly ask for.